Students, now we are going to see about the various fiscal functions. Fiscal functions, or we can even call it as the role of government in regulating the various fiscal functions, or is the role fiscal functions, where you can able to see the overview of the center and the state finance commissions. You can expect many questions like this: overview of the center and state finance, or the fiscal finance, or the fiscal functions, or the public finance, and then or is the role of the government in regulating the various functions. So generally, the fiscal functions are actually called as the government functions, and this can be being called as an overview of the central and then both the state finance. See, generally we can able to have the government, it requires funds. The government generally do various options like various work, like it will raise funds. Government will raise funds, and they will raise funds from various resources, and then they will also incur their own expenditure, and they will also even consume goods for the welfare of the economy. For all these things, so they have to do some functions where they can able to get the source and allocate those funds in a proper way. For that, the government has to follow three main functions. The first function is allocation function. Second one is redistribution function. And third one is stabilization function. We can see all these functions one by one. First one is allocation function. Allocation function, which refers to allocation of resources, refers to allocation of resources by the government. So government allocate the resources, the scarce resources, in such a way so that it can put them in the optimal use. So government, what they will do is, they will allocate the scarce resources. We have minimal amount of resources, so put them in optimal use. So where it has the main need, there it can utilize these scarce resources. So the resources are actually very, very limited, so those resources can be utilized for optimal use. That means for the maximum use you can utilize this resources. That is the main aim here. And these resources are actually required for two sectors. The resources what? This resources requires for two sectors. One is private, the other one is public. Private sector, the other one is public sector. So the resources required for the resources are required for public sector and private sector. Private sector and public sector. So public sector, which is you can able to see here as center and state allocation. And private sector, mainly the private sector resources are depends upon the market demand, market supply, and price mechanism for any products. This is about the private sector's demand. And about the public sector's demand, it mainly depends on revenue and expenditure of the government and the activities of government budgeting. So these are the main things. But generally, what happened? The government, they failed to provide the efficient allocation of all these resources. Government, maybe the reasons, there are various reasons where the government, they fail to provide this efficient allocation of resources. Efficient allocation cannot be made possible. What are the reasons for this one? So the reasons for inefficient allocation first reason is monopoly market. Monopoly market, where under the monopoly market, so they take the higher price and produces less. That is the reason. First, they can't able to allocate the resources properly. That is the first reason where you have less amount of production. That's why we can't able to allocate the inefficient resources. The allocation of resources cannot be done. Second stage is externalities. Externalities, you have negative externalities are there. Negative externalities. And they are actually responsible for the inefficient allocation of the resources again. And third one, here we have factor immobility. See, we can't mobilize the factors what we have. The factors of production or whatever the factors you require for a particular commodity cannot be mobilized or cannot be moved to the particular area or wherever you want. And there is the next reason where you can't efficiently allocate the resources. Then fourth reason is imperfect information. Imperfect information about any products or all these things. There you can able to have lack of information about the entire production, all these things. That is the next stage where again you can't able to allocate the proper resources. And last one, inequalities of distribution of income and goods. Inequalities of distribution of income and goods. See, here we have an economy where you can able to have rich and poor. So there's normally you can have a gap between the rich and poor, and that is the main reason where the income cannot be distributed between all the people. And there is a second reason, there is the last reason where you have the inefficient allocation of resources. It's a very, very important one. Reasons for inefficient allocation. Next, what are the other instruments where you can where the government can properly allocate the funds? That we can see the instruments for government where they can able to properly allocate the funds and resources. Properly allocate the resources. First one is government can directly produce the economic goods. Government directly produce the economic goods. So So they will not leave it to the private sector. They can give, they can directly produce the economic goods by themselves. Second instrument is they can influence government. They can influence allocation of resources by incentives and disincentives. They can allocate the resources by incentives and disincentives. What is the meaning of incentives and disincentives? Example, incentives refers to government can, what they can do is they can give tax concession and subsidy to the goods which promote the social welfare. Tax concession or subsidy can be given for those goods which promotes the social welfare. That's the first example for incentives. And disincentives in the sense they can improve higher tax. They can give higher tax for the products which is actually having least importance, like cigarettes or alcohol. All these things they can able to give higher tax, impose higher tax. This can be called as disincentives. This is the way they can able to allocate the resources in the proper way. Then the third one here is government can influence the resources through regulatory activities. Or legal framework. Legally they can allocate, or legally they can increase, they can raise many stages for the regulation of the thing. So that's all about the allocation function.